Welcome to the Identity Work Podcast. If you are a high achiever struggling to find purpose in work, then join us as we discover how to create more meaning in work and life. Welcome to today's episode of the Identity Work Podcast. I am especially excited today because we have Professor Bobby Parmar from my former school, UVA, Darden School of Business, here to join us. He's also the author of the new book, Radical Doubt, which we're going to unpack quite a bit. Also, you're going to give us a little bit of an insight into what's going on in the MBA landscape with us high achievers, and saw an article the other day in the Wall Street Journal about MBA's fire sale or something like that. So we can unpack that. But you are an award-winning professor, and your research helps organizations navigate complex ethical challenges and create sustainable value for stakeholders. You are happily married for over 20 years now with two daughters. You're a specialist in martial arts. The Financial Times even said your book, in a crowded field of decision-making guides, this book stands out for treating doubt as a trusted companion, no matter if you are a CEO or a new project manager, of which Adam and I are both. So without further ado, welcome to this show, Professor. We're excited to have you.
Thanks so much for having me, Stephen. Great to see you again.
Great to see you too. And as we've said earlier, neither of us have aged in the past 10 years.
Tell that to my knees.
Yeah, I love it. So, Professor, we talked a little bit about what you do, but we always like to start our guests talking about who you are. So, how do your daughters describe who you are?
Yeah, I guess I'm the dad who, creates treasure hunts for his kids every summer at the beach. I'm a husband, as you said, for now 21 years. I'm a professor and researcher, and I'm someone who's always found myself at the intersection of like different circles. I never was someone who found myself like squarely within a single circle, but always kind of in the intersection of things, whether that was being both kind of Indian and American, or a student and a professor, a son and a father. And I've always kind of found really interesting ways of connecting those. I've felt that uncertainty in my life, which is probably why I study how people deal with uncertainty in their daily decision making.
Yeah, and I guess that brings us to your book a little bit of, what was the catalyst for you to write the book? And out of all the topics that you can write about, and I know you specialize in ethics as well, why doubt?
Yeah, so this is my 19th year teaching at Darden, and I'm so lucky to work with MBA students like you, and outstanding, really interesting executives from lots of different industries. And part of my job as a teacher and a researcher is to talk about best practices and help people build skill in applying tools and techniques to their decisions and to the problems that they're solving. And in class, things go well and people are always grateful and thankful for our time together. But then when you actually observe them at work, or you ask, like, how did it go when you applied that? People don't. They don't apply what they learn. Applying best practice can be really hard. And so I got really curious about why. Why is it that when we teach people, for example, how to frame a problem, they rush to solve the problem anyway without taking time to frame it effectively? Or like really basic decision-making advice, like solid advice, you should compare and contrast multiple options. Most people don't do that. They find the one option they like and they run at it. And so I got really curious about why is it that despite, the science-based evidence that we teach, and people like it and they enjoy it, why don't they actually apply these things? And so I got really curious about that, and I noticed that in the process of application, there are uncertainties that happen. There are like, I don't know how to do this, or I'm not sure what goes in which bucket, or this feels uncomfortable when I don't know which option to choose from, or I'm not quite sure how to frame this problem. And I found that doubt is a thing that causes many people to give up on applying best practice. And so I wanted to write a book that helped people think about doubt differently, not just as a source of perhaps frustration or discomfort, but as a catalyst for learning. And I think that high achievers in particular are really prone to these kinds of flaws because, they're really good at getting the right answer. And the second that a right answer isn't available, it's a really good excuse to give up and find a decision where there is a right answer.
Mm. Yeah, that's good. And I'm glad doubt isn't something that gets talked about that much in the business world, right? I think we we only know it to some extent as like imposter syndrome. Like I doubt my abilities to be in this role. And so it's nice for you to like cast a spotlight on it because it is something we all, whether it's doubt in making a decision or doubt in my specific ability to do this specific thing. It's not really like I've never had a team member like, "Hey, Steven, I'm really doubting my abilities." Like people just don't don't use the word. I don't know, Adam, your experience kind of with doubt as well.
Yeah, I was gonna ask for the definition of doubt, or if there's maybe multiple definitions of doubt that are, different framing. I'm thinking of myself in instances where I've experienced this. I recently bought a house, and I feel like this situation happened for me like a dozen times in this 3-week period where I'm like, I've done some real estate investing, so this is maybe my like eighth financial transaction. So it's not just like I took a college class on real estate investing. It's also like I've sat in this chair 7 times before, and still the 8th time, I'm like, I just like, went with one mortgage broker and like that rate seemed pretty good. So I like rolled with that one. And like the reason that I didn't go look at others was like, I don't know, they're probably all the same, right? Which is such a bad reason that I like probably left a lot of money on the table. Or like, I didn't negotiate that because I didn't want to feel awkward that that other
Right.
person on the table was going to be like mad at me about, trying to reduce the cost by $500 or something like that. And I think as you were talking, I'm like reflecting on this, and some of it is certainly like fear, like a doubt of myself and sort of like
Mm.
afraid of the shame that would come from that. And I think there's also some external doubt there that's like,
Totally.
I doubt that there are other good options. And so this is sort of like the most efficient route for me as a smart person to follow. And yeah, so just be curious for you to unpack more of like, what is
Yeah,
doubt and what are the different ways that it manifests?
love it. And that was a great example, Adam. So, the way that I think about doubt is that doubt is the presence of multiple conflicting interpretations. And so when we're thinking about your example of a real estate transaction, it might be, well, is this the right property? Or is this other one the right property? I'm not sure which one to invest in. Or is this the right mortgage broker to work with? Or is there another one? And there might be good reasons for multiple options, and you don't have a clear path forward. There isn't a single operating interpretation of the situation at hand. There's multiple ways to interpret. And when we don't have a single operating interpretation of the situation at hand, then it's hard to know how to move forward. Which broker do I use? Is this the right job for me? Should I change my career? There are all kinds of questions that occur. And most of us associate that feeling of not knowing, of being able to see something and interpret it in multiple ways, as psychologists would call it, like an aversive feeling. It's uncomfortable because we like having an answer. We like having a sense of, I know what this is. I've seen it. I recognize it. I know what to do in response to this stimulus or this decision that I'm facing. And so much of our educational experience reinforces the idea that being smart, being competent, being a high achiever means being a right answer getter. And then we encounter situations and decisions like the one that you encountered, where there isn't a single right answer to get. We have to switch from being a right answer getter to becoming a better answer maker. And that means engaging with doubt to not be paralyzed by multiple conflicting interpretations, but to become more curious, to look out and pay attention to different things, to generate hypotheses, to collect some data, to test those hypotheses, all of which are really good, effective decision making behaviors that people just drop because they're uncomfortable.
So yeah, maybe
Fascinating.
even pressing into this example too. Yeah, what is kind of yeah, what are we to do? It sounds like we should accept it, right? It's like, hey, don't be afraid of doubt. It's a natural feeling, and also press into it because if you press into it, you're actually going to make better decisions. Is that
Yeah,
kind of
absolutely
the
right. Absolutely right. So, one metaphor that I use with my students is doubt is like the burn that happens on the eighth rep of your workout, right? It's not a reason, that's the part where you're actually getting stronger. And so, it's not a reason to stop working out and say, you know what, I'll never be good at bicep curls. I'm just the kind of person who, every time I do this, I feel the burn and it's something wrong with me. That's the moment where you're actually getting stronger. So, those are the moments we want to lean in. And we're going to find those moments at every stage of the decision making process, from framing problems to generating alternatives to selecting those alternatives and justifying that to a different group of stakeholders, creating flexible and adaptive strategies. All of those things are moments where we're not going to have a clear sense of what to do, but we're going to have to deal with that feeling of discomfort and push through and to see it differently, see it not just as there's something wrong with me, but this is the moment where I'm about to become more capable or about to learn something new. So some of that has to do with how we think about doubt. And then other parts are like actually building the practices and getting reps in so that we know actually I made it through that eighth rep, I can do nine. But if we give up, then we can't actually have that insight.
Are
And what are
there
s
oh,
no,
are
you
there
go for
different
it, Adam.
failure modes here? I'm envisioning like to continue on your workout metaphor, like
Mhm.
I just keep picking up 10-pound dumbbells to bench press 10-pound dumbbells. And I'm so good at it that there's just no doubt in my mind that I am going to crush this like set of 5 10-pound dumbbells. Or like I pick up hundreds and I sit down to do that. And like, I'm not going to get one of these, but like, I mean, that's too much doubt. How do I think about, finding the right middle amount of doubt for my decision I need to make?
Yeah, exactly. It's such a great question. And yes, I like that idea, the way you phrased it around these different failure modes. Yeah, there's lots of coping strategies. One might be just avoiding a particular type of decision. Another is, pushing ahead and saying, hey, I know this is the right answer, even if you don't know. And I think a lot of us have been trained to believe that effective leaders have the expertise and the knowledge and the certainty to push through. And sometimes we can, have this like certainty theater almost. Like I'm so confident and I know what I'm doing. But the way that we think about the optimal amount of doubt, the point of engaging doubt is not to just stew in uncertainty and to sit back and admire the problem. We want to think effectively so that we can act effectively, right? The point is to be able to make effective decisions, do things for our organizations and for our own lives that are effective. And when we don't spend enough time thinking about alternate perspectives, sometimes we can fall into the trap of ready, fire, aim, rush at something only to be blindsided by something we could have seen ahead of time. Right. On the other hand, we can get caught into analyzing every, analysis paralysis. We can get caught into analyzing every possible solution and never actually doing anything. And so part of the skill and the discipline of learning to embrace doubt is to identify, what is it that I don't know? How is that going to help change my decision? What are some experiments or data that I can collect that would help me build confidence, even if it won't help me get to the final answer? And how can I do that in a iterative kind of fast way rather than trying to wait till I get the perfect answer before I do anything?
That's good.
Yeah, and
Go
kind of
ahead,
the other
Steve.
side of the coin is doubt is what you wanna get to is confidence. So how
Yeah,
can we
that's right.
build more confidence in our decision making?
Yeah. So I think a big part of that confidence comes from knowing that you've kicked the tires effectively and seen the problem from multiple angles. Sometimes we can have this false sense of confidence because we know that our answer is the morally right answer, or we've seen this before, and we can actively shut out experiences and data and conversations that might help us see things in different ways. Part of what we notice in the world, our perception is driven by our motivation. And I talk about this a little bit in the book, just a little bit of introductory neuroscience. When we are motivated to go after some reward, some prize, something out in the future or out there in the world that would make us excited, that we would find rewarding. Maybe it's a great conversation with a colleague. Maybe it's a promotion or a new job. What happens is, in order to catalyze our action, our thinking narrows to focus only on the positives of going after that thing. And we miss, like, hey, there's some potential risks, or we better watch out for this potential pitfall. The same thing happens when we look out in the world and see something scary, whether it's physically threatening or socially threatening. We have part of our brain that is protecting us from those kinds of risks. And we only notice all the bad things. And so both our pursue system and our protect system create our experience of certainty, and they actively filter out contradictory information that might help us think more carefully and in a more nuanced way about our decisions and about our situations. Thankfully, there is a third system in our brain, what I call our pause and piece together system, that comes online when we notice multiple conflicting interpretations. It's like, I could see it this way, or I could see it this way. I see this potential career opportunity. I would love to be in a company like this. I think I would have really great colleagues. I'm concerned about my growth and mobility. I'm concerned about what the company does. Like, how do I tackle that? And so then our positive piece together system is seeing those multiple conflicting interpretations. What do we do with that? We might run away from that problem, or we might start to engage and say, okay, what can I do about the potential downsides? What can I do to secure some of the potential upsides? And by engaging in that thought process, kicking the tires, learning about the problem from different angles, we can start to build more confidence. And again, that's a
Hate to be
discipline.
the guy to I know, I hate to bring up the guy who brings up AI, but we made it 15 minutes without talking about it, so I feel like that's pretty good. It feels like AI actually might help here because I may not be confident enough to bring up my doubts in front of the team, but in the chat window, I could maybe say, "Hey, help, help cast I'm not confident in my decision, help find data, one way or another." And I read an article too about how people are actually they're more comfortable having candid conversations with a chatbot than their doctor
Yeah,
about
yeah,
like stuff that's
fascinating.
going on. Do you feel like AI could actually help in this?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it depends on how it's used. I think we all know that there are ways in which AI can be used as a shortcut for our decision making. Give me the answer, tell me what to do. And then there are ways that AI can be used to further our thinking, saying, okay, here's what I think we should do. What are the weaknesses? Where could I go wrong if I pursued this particular strategy? Or if I went with this mortgage broker, what are some pitfalls that I'm not thinking of? And if there are ways that we can expand our thinking and again, not treat the outputs of AI as the final answer, it can increase our learning and help us deal with doubt in a safer, less threatening way. There's an interesting study that I think can help us frame AI well. This study has to do with how experts and novices treat their intuition. So when you give them a complex decision scenario, both experts, people who've been making complex decisions for 15 plus years, and novices, like current MBA students or undergraduate business students who don't have a lot of experience, they both have an intuition. They're like, okay, I'm leaning towards option A or I'm leaning towards option B. Novice decision makers treat that intuition as if it's their decision. They're like, huh, I'm leaning towards option B. Option B is my decision. Expert decision makers treat their intuition as if it's a hypothesis. They're like, okay, I'm leaning towards option B. What could change my mind? I'm leaning towards option B. What are the kinds of things that I could do to mitigate the risks of choosing option B over option A? They treat their intuition as a starting point for learning rather than as an ending point for their decision. And I think
Mm,
the same metaphor is useful when we think about AI. When we're using AI, it's really tempting for some tasks, and I think it's probably effective on some types of tasks to use it as, look, I don't need to write XYZ recommendation letter for someone to buy a dishwasher. AI can do that. But if we treat all our decisions that way, then we're not building that skill. We're not stepping back to say, okay, well, AI is recommending this. Where could that go wrong? Here's where that conflicts with my experience. There are lots of ways of using AI to expand our thinking rather than contract.
I would love to like almost create a mini case study for
Yeah,
like someone that's contemplating a mid early life career change decision. How would you advise someone who's like, I'm in healthcare and I don't feel like I'm enjoying healthcare very much and I want to go work in some other field that has more like upward mobility or something like that?
sure, sure.
Like
Yeah, it's a great.
how should I think about this sort of like massive career pivot versus the skills that I've developed and sort of go manage the doubt and make this decision?
Yeah, awesome. So let's talk about a couple of common pitfalls and then let's get to the positive practices. So when we're making big decisions like that, like, hey, I've spent, 10, 15 years in healthcare. I'm not sure this is for me. What should I do? Sometimes people feel an overwhelming sense of doubt and they say, you know what, this is too hard. I'm just going to continue doing what I'm doing. I got a job. I'm paying the bills. I'm going to stick with healthcare. I actually avoid the decision about what to do with my. Another pitfall is somebody in that very same predicament is saying, okay, well, and my friend Adam is a real estate investor and he's really happy. So I'm just going to drop all my healthcare experience and I'm going to do what Adam does, ready, fire, aim. And then they find themselves in the exact same position 2 years later where maybe I'm not so happy in real estate development because this is something that's new to me and I didn't do the due diligence to kind of figure out what would work. So, someone who is more adept at dealing with doubt would face a similar situation and say, okay, I'm in a place where a lot of people might find themselves, which is I see some good things about my career and my experience. I have some open questions. What are they? One of my open questions might be, where can I find some upward mobility? Is it true that I have to change my career completely to do that? Maybe I can explore options at other healthcare companies or in other organizations related to healthcare where I might find that upward mobility. Maybe this person finds that, look, the thing that is really bothering, so the introspection around what is it that I want out of my career? What is the job to be done for my career? How is it going to create joy and meaning in my life? Is that actually want to be more on the front lines of healthcare. I'm too far removed. I'm doing too much like finance and administrative stuff. I actually want to be more on the front lines. Okay, well, then what are some experiments and ways where we can start to collect data? Can I shadow someone for a day? Can I interview someone and get a sense of what their life is like? And then scale up my investment in a new career, maybe getting a degree, taking an online class. As my confidence grows that actually what it is that I want is to be on the front lines. Actually, what it is that I want is to have upward mobility. And so it's someone who isn't deterred by uncertainty, but is making steady progress towards learning and not giving up on that learning because there are big questions they can't answer in the moment.
Mm.
Does that help?
Yeah, it's great. It's really great. I think it's really helpful framing on how to break a really big problem into like much smaller problems and then
Exactly.
find tiny experiments almost within those small problems to gather data.
Part of what make that, go ahead.
I think a like theory or experiment that you are probably more familiar with than me, but I've found very helpful lately as I was thinking about house buying is, and I looked this up. I didn't just know this off the top of my head.
Nice.
The optimal stopping theory, which is if it sounds like you are familiar with, so I will probably just defer to you to explain, and then I
Why
will.
don't you give
And
us an overview and then I can jump into
yeah,
it?
the way that it's been helpful for me, or like the basic overview, is that it's this theory that like you should analyze options up to some certain point with no removing the sort of like option of making a decision from your consideration and just rate them as like good, bad, and ugly and why they're good, bad, and ugly. And then at some point, once you cross the threshold of like, I have seen enough options, you just accept the next option that's better than all the options that you've seen with like no more doubt or fear in your mind that you could potentially find a better option. Which for me, and I've been like applying this to house buying most recently, is sort of like there's so many houses, there's always going to be new houses that are popping up, and like at some point you just have to say like this has passed my threshold compared to the things that I've seen, and that is like sufficiently good for me. But it sounds very similar even to what you're getting at of like making career decisions is like you need to gather data for some amount of time to make sure you understand the available options, and then at some point you need to commit and run and just like
Yeah,
trust
that's
that
right.
you've made a good decision now that you have some data.
Yeah. I think it's a really great example. What the house buying decision doesn't quite highlight compared to more kind of leadership and organizational decisions is that, once you buy a house, you can think about other things, right? Well, once you're making a leadership decision about like who to hire or what career, there are all kinds of other things that might be potential risks that you can try to mitigate. As how can I make this option better?
Mm,
So, yes, we might pick, hey, I've now moved into this real estate investment career, and then your energies don't go to just ignoring the problem, but it's like, hey, how can I make this better? How can I make it work for me? How can I You're engaging in that process of continually refining and making that option better rather than getting rid of the decision. I totally accept that in the house buying case, or lots of purchasing decisions, we want to close the door on that decision and move on with our life. But there are a certain class of decisions, particularly, we're thinking about our career and work, certain types of leadership decisions or strategic decisions where after we've decided is when the real work begins.
We're going to shift shortly into zooming out to talk about the macro environment in one of the top MBA programs in the country. But before we do that, what didn't we ask that we should have asked about your book? And then maybe what's one thing, like if our listeners can just remember one thing from the book that we apply to our life, what would that be?
Yeah, totally. Great. I like how the tables have turned, Stephen. I got to ask you the hard questions when you were here at Darden, and now you get to. So,
You're right. This
I'll
is a
tell.
moment where I made it in life.
Yeah. I'll just share a story and then I'll give you kind of a final, like an insight. In writing the book, writing the book was a lot of fun in part because I got to write in my teaching voice and not my research voice. Writing research articles, you don't get to use adjectives and adverbs. You don't get to use the pronoun I. Like it's completely, antiseptic. And so this was a lot of fun. And as I was pitching this book to a bunch of publishers and editors, they came back and they were like, "We really like this idea. We don't like how you're going about it. Can you just give us the answer? Can you do like, the just tell us like the takeaways and the five magical steps to, to turn doubt into certainty. And I just had a hard time with that. I didn't want to write that book, in part because I felt like it completely undercut my message. Right, to sell a book that was like, here are the five steps to make doubt your rocket fuel or something like that, just felt like it was doing a disservice to this experience that we all have that can be really aversive or debilitating. And I wanted to write a book where my readers went through an experience where they experienced doubt, but then also had these moments of clarity through the writing. And so it was a lot of fun to write. I've heard that it's relatively fun to read, but I wanted the book to build the skills that the book is about rather than to atrophy the skills that the book is about. And so I hope that piques people's interest. And if there's like one headline that I want listeners to wrestle with regarding the message of the book, I think it'd be something like, a meaningful life isn't really built from having certainty, but from the skillful embracing of doubt.
Mm, that's really good.
Yeah, it kind of speaks to our broader thesis, Bobby. We've talked a lot about like meaningful work in life. It's not about like finding it, right? It's about the journey, and then kind of regardless of where you are, how can you graft it in your daily life?
Yeah.
So I
And if
think
there
it
was a
kind of
simple
dovetails with
answer
that.
to that, then I think that meaning would not be as great, right? So part of what gives things meaning is struggle. Part of what gives things meaning is that I had discretion and choice and agency. And I think that's one of the things we end up discounting is when there's a recipe, when there's a right answer, it doesn't matter if Bobby does it or Steven does it or Adam does it. But the second there's choice and discretion, all of a sudden, Adam's experience and Steven's style, all of those things become much more valuable when there's uncertainty and doubt. And so many of us think about doubt as something that's scary, but it's also a source of our agency.
Yeah, it's really good. Reflecting on my own career, certainly the moments when I felt the least meaningful are the moments when I have been the most bored or had like the least amount of complexity in my life or work. And I think, the moments of the most complexity are probably the moments where I feel the most stress. But 3 years after that are the moments I reflect back on and think those were definitely the most meaningful moments of my life. There's so much growth there. There's so much connection. There's so much learning that occurred in the midst of those moments of doubt that is really honestly what spurred this podcast was sort of being in a moment of atrophy and process it, wanting to go process what makes work meaningful for me and landing on that end realization, which is like complexity and growth and learning being what makes me feel connected to work, which is maybe another synonym for that is doubt.
Yeah, that's such a great connection. We talk a lot, particularly in higher ed, about the importance of learning, and we treat learning as this predominantly cognitive thing. Like it's just about your brain and how your brain works. But learning is just as much a deeply social and emotional thing. There are times where you can be in a hard job where you are learning, but it's just you on your own and it's a slog. Or that exact same task could be working with a great group of people that you respect, who trust you to pick yourself up when you make errors. And that exact same challenge becomes so much more enjoyable and meaningful. And so that learning happens in this social emotional context that we don't talk about enough. We just think like, hey, you can flip the switch and somebody's going to learn. Turns out it's not that easy.
Yeah, definitely.
It's good. All right, now shifting gears a little bit since I'm 10 years ish out of out of Darden.
It's been
What's
10
the
years. That's
environment?
incredible.
I know, it's wild. What's the environment like right now on campus, and how are students kind of thinking about work and what they want to do?
Yeah. First of all,
And
I
maybe
think,
even how have you seen students' feelings towards work change and kind of evolve since you've been on grounds?
yeah. So a couple things. Look, we at Darden, we're so lucky to have amazing students. We had them 10 years ago and we have them today. Students who come to work hard to learn. It's such a gift. And we are in kind of very interesting economic times. And so given the larger economic uncertainty, what's happening, particularly driven by the tech industry with layoffs is causing a lot of uncertainty and folks are nervous about it. The last report I heard from our career development center, we're pretty much on track with where we were last year. And it means that students are getting internships and jobs a little bit later than they would like, which is hard. It's hard to balance your career goals with your learning goals, with your social goals, and all those kinds of things. So it's adding stress to the system. And then another thing that's adding stress to the system is how much things are changing relative to AI. Of course, some of the job layoffs and things are related to AI, at least in name, if not in actual like organizational operations. But it's changing how we learn here at Darden too. You know, students are not hesitating to ask Gen AI when I cold call a student in class, like, hey, Stephen, what do you think we should do about X? They're typing that into a Gen AI platform and responding like, hey, I think we should do this. And thankfully, there are some telltale signs where I can be like, well, what do you think? It's clear that, you know, you asked Grok that question or whatever.
Oh my gosh.
But I think it is changing how we learn, it's changing how we work, and figuring out the ways where it can be something that builds our skill versus atrophies our skill is a challenge that's happening in the workplace and in institutions of higher ed. So that's a critical challenge. And just connecting back to the larger themes of the podcast, I still find my students deeply concerned about meaning and purpose at work. You know, they don't want just a job, although economic uncertainty pushes them a little bit more in that direction. I think what's hard about that is they want to build a life and they want to build a career and they want to work with people that they respect, doing things that are important. I talk a lot about how, for me, meaning and happiness sits at the intersection of having people that I admire and love, working on important things that are hard, and having something to hope for. And I think our students want those things from work and don't always get.
That's good. What advice are you giving your daughters right now?
It's interesting. I have two daughters, and my younger daughter wants to be a nurse. And so that's kind of interesting. I think that's a career that obviously will be enabled in new ways by AI, but at least the consensus is that, you know, it's not a career that is, you know, threat from disappearing. There are lots of things that nurses do and can do that are still required. My older daughter is interested in psychology and is much more, she's undecided as to whether she wants to do more clinical work like her mother or do more research work like me. So she'll figure it out. But what I'm telling them and my students is the talk is all about AI. But if we zoom out, AI is enabling this transition from the information economy to what others and myself have called the execution economy. So when ideas and frameworks and language become commoditized, what matters then is not just the idea or the slides or what you say, it's creating results. And so an example of this is like anybody can get on Gen AI and, hey, what's a script for firing someone or giving someone difficult feedback? But how do you do that in a way that gives that person dignity and worth and where they hear you and it's authentic to you? That is still not replicable. Now anyone can come up with, oh, what's a really good strategy for my company to do X, Y, and Z? Catalyzing a group of people to carry out that strategy, change their behavior, learn. That is the next frontier. And so if the competitive advantage is going towards how do we execute, of course, that can be much more efficient and enabled by AI, but it's a different set of skills than just having the idea or being able to write up that idea or creating the proposal or the slide deck. And so the challenge for me is how do I try to reflect that in the classroom? How do I find ways? I mean, I think education in general has gotten by trying to find substitutes for execution that are, you know, like proxies, basically. They're like, okay, instead of actually developing yourself and changing this behavior, write about how you would do it. Instead of leading your company and launching a new product, create a slide deck that's going to guide that, which is great. It's a step in that process. But now that that's commoditized and you can press a couple buttons and get that, the real value is still in making that change to your behavior or launching that product for your company. How do we help people do that? How do we help the skills to do that? I think that's the question. And I bet that's going to be replicated in different careers.
It's good. When you
Yeah,
hear
it's really good.
stories from alumni who are maybe happy versus not, or, you know, maybe happy is not the right word because we've talked about like the fruit of the struggle, but in kind of that meaningful, and I think you kind of carved out like what meaning and purpose looks like in your career. Are there any common threads that kind of stand out from you?
Yeah, sometimes, I mean, I really loved Adam's example. I think sometimes meaning and purpose can be surprises. It's not something we can always plan in advance. I think about a couple of really meaningful episodes in my life. One was going on the board of my daughter's school and eventually becoming board chair. At first, I was doing it to help my kids. It felt like there's a lot of time commitment, but it turned out to be incredibly meaningful. One, I was working with a group of parents that were incredibly engaged, that cared, that were expert in their own domains, whether they were lawyers or doctors or hedge fund managers. And it was just so fun to work with an amazing group of people that were all like a mission driven. Another really meaningful moment in my life is after getting tenure, one of my students asked me to lead a Knowles expedition with Darden students. Can we do this trip to Patagonia? And I am the least outdoor person you would ever meet. Like, I'm allergic to everything. I was like, I would probably die in the first 20 minutes. And like in a fit of rebellion, I was like, yeah, I think I'm going to do this. And I went on a trip, a 2-week trip on my own with a group of 11 strangers to Wyoming, backpacking, carrying like a 50-pound backpack through the Wind River Range. It was one of the hardest things I've done. But it was so meaningful. I made great friendships. I learned a bunch of stuff about myself. And then I ended up doing that with students as well. We did end up going on the Patagonia trip. And it was just like, one of my colleagues said it was the most out of character thing they had ever heard of in relation to me. And so I think finding ways to surprise yourself about who you are and what you can do are things that create meaning. I mean, a common theme in my students who are really happy, who, yes, they're dealing with hardship in their lives and in their careers, but you can tell they're kind of motivated and find things meaningful, is that they invest a lot in their relationships. And that's a really easy thing to say, but a hard thing to do, right? Because we all become task focused and it's like, look, I want to build my resume and I want to get this next promotion. But taking the time to enrich the lives of the people that you're around, like, it comes back to you. Right? It comes back because other people are investing in you. And that's what makes things really meaningful is somebody you haven't seen for 15 years comes by and says, that thing you said to me, I still remember. Or that time you helped me, like, I'll never forget that. I didn't believe in myself and you believed in me. That changed my life. Like, building those stories because you really care about people and you're investing in them. I can't think of a better way to like enrich each other than investing in each other and like caring about relationships and building our leadership skills to do that effectively. Having a high bar and treating people with respect and dignity.
It's good. We should probably end on that. That's a good last word. But we will go to our always on questions, though.
Okay.
Looking at your experience of work, is meaning found or created?
Yeah, I think I'm going to take a stand on this one. I'm not going to give you the answer I'm sure you get, which is both.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say meaning is created, but it's not created by an individual. It's created by a group of people. And so the reason why we think meaning is found is that we need each other to create it effectively. That you and I and Adam work together on a project, and not only am I investing my attention and resources to notice why this is meaningful, but you are too. And what you're doing are the things that I find that accelerate my own creation of meaning. And so the headline here is that meaning is created in groups.
Good. And I guess you already answered kind of the one thing you want our listeners thinking about the tension as we finish the commute home or take a moment to journal over the weekend, but I'll give you the space. Anything else to add there?
Yeah, no, I think that's the one I would go with, right? That meaning isn't created by having certainty, but by embracing doubt.
Yeah. And how can our listeners get in touch with you and buy your book?
Awesome. A couple ways. I'm on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from folks on LinkedIn. That always makes my day. My faculty page at Darden, and then the book is available anywhere books are sold, from Amazon to Barnes and Nobles, and your local bookstore as well.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today and for writing the book, for being curious. Thank you for the impact you've had on my life 10 years ago, which is bearing fruit today. And so we just, really thank you for joining.
Thank you for inviting me. What a joy to work with you. Adam, a pleasure to meet you as well.
This show has been brought to you by Arvo Advisory, a new category of consulting company, half management consultancy and half executive communication and PR firm. Arvo works with great leaders to craft and communicate their strategy to achieve change and create valuable companies. Find out more at arvoadvisory.com or follow us on LinkedIn. And finally, if you've been blessed at all by this podcast, please remember to rate and review the show or share it with a friend. And with that, go forth and know that you are loved because of who you are and not because of what you do for work. See you next time.